You heard it before you saw it. A low rumble coming down the street that you felt in your shoes before it reached your ears. Then it turned the corner. Long hood, split grille, chrome catching the sun, your father's hand on the wheel, and that look on his face that he only had when he was behind the wheel of that car. That was a Pontiac. And if you grew up in America, you already know what happened next. You never forgot that sound. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Your father was a Pontiac man, or he was not. There was no middle ground. In America, in the 1960s, you were a Ford man, or a Chevy man, or a Pontiac man, and that was your identity, the same way your name was your identity. Your father picked Pontiac because Pontiac did not apologize. It did not ask permission. It sat in the driveway with its hood scoop pointed at the sky and its exhaust ticking in the heat, and it told the whole neighborhood exactly who lived in that house. A man who liked things loud, a man who liked things fast, a man who turned the key and felt something in his chest that nothing else in his life gave him. Not his job, not his house, not his lawn, that car, that engine, that sound. Maybe it was a GTO. If your father had a GTO, you already know what that meant. It meant he was the kind of man who did not care what the neighbors thought, because the GTO was born from disobedience. 3 engineers at Pontiac on a Saturday morning in 1963 looked at a rule that said no mid-size car could have an engine bigger than 330 cubic inches. And one of them, a man named Bill Collins, looked at the new Tempest Le Mans on the lift and said to John DeLorean, "You know it would take about 20 minutes to stick a 389 in here." And DeLorean said, "Let us try it." They found a loophole. The rule only applied to standard engines, not options. So they made the biggest engine Pontiac had into an option package and called it the GTO. They stole the name from Ferrari. General Motors expected to sell 5,000. They sold 32,000 in the first year, and every single one of them sounded like a promise being kept. The GTO changed what a car could mean to a young man in America. Before the GTO, a car was something your father drove to work. After the GTO, a car was something you dreamed about while you sat in algebra class and stared out the window. 325 horsepower, tri-power carburation, a Hurst shifter that clicked into gear like a rifle bolt, 0 to 60 in under 7 seconds in 1964, which might not sound fast now, but in 1964, it was the fastest thing most people had ever been inside of. Ronnie and the Daytonas wrote a song about it, Little GTO. It went top 5 on the Billboard charts. A car had its own hit record. That is how deep Pontiac got into the American bloodstream. You walked into the Pontiac dealer on a Saturday afternoon, and the showroom floor was waxed so clean you could see the fluorescent lights reflected in it. And there it was, sitting on that floor like it had been waiting for you. The split grille, the wide track stance, the hood that went on forever. You were 17, maybe 16. You had no money and no job and no business being in a car dealership, but the salesman let you sit in it anyway because he knew that the boy who sits in a GTO at 16 buys a Firebird at 22. You opened the door and the smell hit you. Vinyl and carpet and something metallic that came from the engine bay. You sat behind the wheel and your hands found the right places like they had been there before. The gauge cluster was right in front of you. The Hurst shifter was right where your hand fell. And through the windshield, past the hood that stretched out in front of you like a runway, you could see the street and the road and every mile between here and everywhere. You sat there for 10 minutes. The salesman never said a word. He did not have to. The car was doing the selling. You sat in the back seat. You were 8 or 9 or 10. Your father took you for a drive on a Sunday afternoon, and he did not tell your mother where you were going because your mother would have said no. He pulled onto the highway and he pressed the gas pedal, and the car surged forward and you were pushed back into the seat, and the engine note climbed from a rumble to a roar, and the telephone poles started going by faster and faster, and your father looked over at you in the rearview mirror and he was grinning and you were grinning, and the speedometer was somewhere it should not have been, and neither of you said a word. You just listened. That V8 talking to both of you at the same time, saying the same thing it always said, faster, further, more. Then the Firebird came in 1967 and the Trans Am came in 1969, and Pontiac was not just building cars anymore. Pontiac was building identities. The Firebird was the car you bought when you were 22 and single and wanted the world to know it. The Trans Am was the car you bought when you wanted the world to get out of your way. Only 697 Trans Ams were built in that first year. If you saw one on the road in 1969, you pulled over and watched it pass the way you would watch a comet. You did not see another one for months. Then Burt Reynolds showed up. 1977, Smokey and the Bandit. A black and gold Trans Am screaming across the screen at 120 miles per hour with a cowboy hat behind the wheel, and Jerry Reed singing about Eastbound and Down, and the whole theater was on its feet. You went to that movie 3 times, maybe 4. You walked out into the parking lot after the credits, and you looked at your car, whatever it was, and it was not a Trans Am, and that bothered you in a way you could not explain. You drove home that night with the windows down, and you shifted a little harder than you needed to, and you took the long way because the long way had more curves, and you pretended. Everybody pretended. Pontiac sold 68,000 Trans Ams the year before that movie. The year after, they sold 93,000. 2 years later, 187,000. Burt Reynolds did not sell those cars. The idea of freedom sold those cars. Burt Reynolds just showed you what freedom looked like at 120. The screaming chicken. You know what that is without me saying another word. The giant gold Firebird decal on the hood of the Trans Am that spread from fender to fender with its wings open, its talons out, and its eyes staring straight at whoever was in front of you. There is no logo in the history of the automobile industry that said more with less. It said, "I am here." It said, "Move." And every kid who saw that hood coming up behind him on the highway felt something in his stomach that was half fear and half admiration, because whoever was driving that car was not going to slow down, and you knew it. Your first Pontiac. Maybe it was not a GTO. Maybe it was not a Trans Am. Maybe it was a Le Mans you bought used from a lot on Route 9 with rust on the quarter panels and a radio that only picked up AM. Maybe it was a Grand Prix with velour seats that smelled like cigarettes and the previous owner's cologne. Maybe it was a Catalina your uncle gave you because he was buying a new one, and he said, "Take care of her," and you said you would, and you did not. It did not matter what model it was. What mattered is that you turned the key, and the Pontiac V8 started, and you felt it in the steering wheel, and in the seat, and in your hands, and you thought, "This is mine. This is the first real thing that is mine." And you drove it everywhere. To work, to her house, to the lake, to the drive-in, to the place where the road ended and the fields began, and you parked and turned the engine off and sat there in the silence and looked at the dashboard and the gauges and the Arrowhead logo on the steering wheel, and you thought about all the places this car was going to take you. You were 19, the whole world was on the other side of the windshield, and Pontiac was the thing that was going to carry you there. You took a girl out in that car. The first real date where the car mattered. You washed it in the driveway for an hour. You dried it with a chamois. You checked the oil, even though you had checked it that morning. You picked her up, and she got in and she said, "Nice car," and you said, "Thanks," but what you meant was, "This car is who I am, and I need you to understand that." You drove to the place everyone went on Saturday nights, and you parked, and you left the radio on, and the engine ticked as it cooled, and the vinyl seat was warm, and the windows fogged up, and the world outside disappeared. That car was not transportation that night. It was a room, the only room you owned. And years later, long after the girl was gone and the car was gone and that parking spot was turned into a strip mall, you could still remember the exact way the dashboard lights reflected off the windshield when you turned the key to accessory and the radio played something slow. Some things do not need an engine to move you, they just need a memory. Then something happened, not all at once, slowly. The way a fire goes out when nobody adds wood, the oil crisis in 1973, the emissions regulations, the insurance companies that tripled your premium if you drove anything with more than 200 horsepower, the government that decided speed was dangerous and big engines were wasteful, and the things that made a car exciting were the things that needed to be regulated out of existence. The GTO lost 50 horsepower in a single year, then another 50. By 1974, the GTO was gone. Not discontinued, gone. The name that started the muscle car era was pulled off the production line, and nobody at General Motors held a funeral. Pontiac tried. You have to give them that. They tried to stay relevant in a world that did not want what Pontiac was built to give. The Fiero in 1984 was supposed to be the comeback, a mid-engine, two-seat sports car that looked like a Ferrari and cost less than a Camaro, but the engine caught fire. Literally, Pontiacs were catching fire in parking lots and driveways, and the recall destroyed the car before it ever had a chance. The Aztec in 2001, the car that broke the internet before the internet existed. It looked like someone had designed it by committee during a power outage. Car magazines called it the ugliest vehicle ever manufactured. It was the car that told the world Pontiac did not know who it was anymore, because that was the real death, not the bankruptcy, the identity. Pontiac used to be the division that broke the rules, the division that put a 389 in a Le Mans when General Motors said no, the division that named a car after a Ferrari and dared anyone to complain. By the 2000s, Pontiac was sharing platforms with Chevrolet and putting different badges on the same car and calling it excitement. The Grand Am was a Chevy Malibu with a body kit. The G6 was an Aura with different headlights. The people at General Motors had taken the division that invented the muscle car and turned it into a sticker. April 2009, General Motors filed for bankruptcy. And in the restructuring, someone in a boardroom decided that Pontiac was expendable. They kept Chevrolet, they kept Buick, they kept GMC, they kept Cadillac, and they killed Pontiac. 84 years of production, GTO, the Firebird, the Trans Am, the Grand Prix, the Bonneville, the Catalina, all of it gone in a press release. Not a ceremony, not a farewell, a press release. The brand that taught America what a car could make you feel was announced dead in the same tone you would use to announce a change in parking policy. The last Pontiac rolled off the line in late 2009. It was a G6, a white four-door sedan, no split grille, no hood scoop, no screaming chicken, no rumble. It looked like a rental car, because that is mostly what it was. And somewhere in a garage in Michigan or Ohio or Texas, a man who had kept his 1969 GTO Judge in perfect condition for 40 years read the news, walked out to his garage, sat in the driver's seat, turned the key, listened to that engine, and said nothing. Because what do you say when they kill something you love and they do not even have the decency to explain why? Your father's Pontiac is gone now, sold or scrapped or rusting in a field somewhere behind a barn you will never visit. Or maybe it is in your garage. Maybe you are the one who kept it. Maybe you spent 20 years and more money than your wife knows about keeping that GTO or that Firebird or that Trans Am alive because you could not let go of the thing that taught you what it felt like to be behind the wheel with nowhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. If that is you, then you already know what I am about to say. You are not saving a car. You are saving a Saturday afternoon with your father. You are saving the sound of a 389 starting on a cold morning. You are saving the way the steering wheel felt under your hands when you were 19 and the road was straight and the gas was cheap and the engine was loud and nobody on earth could catch you. Pontiac did not die because people stopped loving it. Pontiac died because the people who owned it stopped understanding what it was. It was never a car company. It was never a division of General Motors. It was the sound your father's engine made when he turned the key on a Sunday morning. It was the way your heart rate changed when a black and gold Trans Am passed you on the highway. It was the first time you pressed the gas pedal all the way to the floor and felt the back end step out and the tires break loose and the whole car come alive underneath you like an animal that had been waiting for you to let it run. You can still hear one sometimes, at a car show, at a stoplight, in a parking lot where some man your age has kept his alive the way you wish you had kept yours. The engine starts and the sound crosses the pavement and hits you in a place that has nothing to do with your ears. It hits you in 1968, in the passenger seat, your father driving, the window down, the highway open, and for 3 seconds, you are not standing in a parking lot in 2025. You are sitting in a Pontiac with your father, and the road has no end, and the engine has no limit, and the man behind the wheel is still alive and still young and still grinning the way he only grinned when the tachometer climbed past 4,000 and the whole car was singing. What was your Pontiac? Was it a GTO, a Firebird, a Trans Am, a Grand Prix? Tell us the year and the color, and tell us where you drove it. I read every single comment.